when I think about sending, when I think about going long term to unreached, I think that it's a kingdom problem. I think that we, as the church in America as a whole, should be working together. So there's this disconnect of churches working together in order to see the mission completed, instead of churches on their own trying to figure out, okay, what do we do by ourselves? Because I feel like that's working against what the Lord has given us. He's given us a plethora of people in the body to see his mission move forward. And sometimes we get so inwardly focused that we forget to look up and say, okay, God, who are we supposed to be working with? How are you leading us so that we can see the fullness of your mission come to pass, as opposed to our own mission come to pass?
The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership between 1615 and Missio Nexus, who have a shared passion to mobilize the people of God to be a part of his mission.
Well, hello and welcome to the podcast. I am Matthew Ellison, and of course, I am joined by my good friend and co-host, Ted Essler. Ted, always good to see you, brother.
Good to see you, Matthew.
Well, I've got a question for you today, but let me give some context before I ask the question, and then you're going to ask our guest the same question. This year, 1615 is celebrating our 20th anniversary. And so one of the things we're doing this year is remembering and rehearsing the work of God in the ministry. So we're celebrating. And we get this from Acts 14:27, where Paul and Barnabas returned from their first missionary journey, and they gather the church, and it says they rehearsed the work of the Spirit and how the door of faith had been opened unto the Gentiles. So they told these God stories, and it's made me mindful in my own life that I'm not doing enough celebrating. And so I'm making it a point this year to celebrate God's work in my life. And so the thing that I'm celebrating right now, and Ted, I know you're joining me in this because you prayed for it as well, but I had a wayward son. He was a big time prodigal. And let's just say the hound of heaven has hunted him down. And my son is pursuing God, and God is pursuing my son. And so, man, I wake up every morning just celebrating that in my life. So I'm going to ask you the question, Ted, what are you celebrating right now?
Well, you shared a big prayer request that God has fulfilled, and very spiritual of you. I'm going to share something a little different. This morning, I woke up and was going to have my quiet time, and I have the incredible pleasure of living on a lake. And when you live on a lake, I've noticed the people around me, they forget the privilege it is to wake up every day to incredible beauty as they look out at the water. So this morning I woke up and I thought, I'm going to go out and I'm going to enjoy my coffee outside. It was a little cool here. And as I was sitting outside enjoying that beautiful scene, a bald eagle landed on the boat lift at the end of the dock in front of my house. And I watched that bald eagle for about 5 minutes as he preened himself and looked around and looked so cool. And I just thought, thank you, Lord, just for the little blessings, the little reminders of your goodness to us. And for me, this place has just been a respite, just a great blessing in my life. And I was just celebrating how incredible it is that I get to be here and experience this kind of beauty every single day. So what a blessing that is for me. Well, on our call today, we have Krystle Roberts and Tyler Collins, and we're going to ask them each to give us a little celebration in the beginning. So, Krystle, I'm going to pick on you first. Do you have something that you want to share with us in celebration?
Yeah, thanks, Ted. We are excited to be here. I'm going to go along the same lines as Matthew and talk about family. I am celebrating being a part of a family who really does love Jesus. And for generations, from my grandparents, my great-grandparents, to my parents, and now us, and my siblings have children, just to see the faithfulness of God from one generation to another has been such a blessing. And I know that I can easily take it for granted, but I am just so thankful for that today. And yeah, so grateful for God for being faithful.
Praise the Lord. Tyler?
Yeah, thanks, Ted and Matthew. I think celebrating is often hard for me, but this weekend actually we saw God move in power. My wife has always struggled with like food allergies and just her body in general. We just had our second kid, and so both times we've had a kid, it's been really hard on her body. And we haven't been able to find answers. And we found a doctor here that is really expensive, but has been highly recommended. And so we, this weekend actually just prayed and asked the Lord, like, Lord, would you provide the money for us to be able to do this? Like we can't pay for this, honestly. And literally that night we had friends come over, we were having dinner. And as they're leaving, they're like, hey, we brought you guys something. We felt like the Lord put it on our heart to give you guys some money, and they hand us an envelope, and we're just in tears, because we literally prayed for it that morning. And they leave, and we open up the envelope, and in the envelope is the exact amount of money that we need in order to go to the doctor. And we're just, yeah, praising the Lord and in tears, and just like very practically, He answered our prayer that day. And so we were just celebrating, praising the Lord. My wife got on the computer and booked the appointment immediately. So, yeah, that's something we were celebrating even this weekend.
Well, I hope our listening and viewing audience just takes a moment right now and just, what are you celebrating that God's doing in your life or family? It could be a big thing. It could be a small thing, but I think we need to make it part of our practice. So, hey, Krystle and Tyler, thank you so much for being with us today. So you're both with the Betsy Stockton Foundation. Maybe tell us a little bit about the foundation and a little bit about Betsy.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Betsy Stockton Foundation we founded it about a year ago, and it was kind of birthed out of this idea. My previous career was actually in financial advising, and so I work in the Austin, Houston, DFW areas. And I remember very clearly I was sitting down with a client, and I'm sorting through his statements and everything, and I pull out an account that has a large sum of money, and he had forgotten that he had that account. And we started dialoguing, and that wasn't the only situation in which that had happened. And so, long story short, I had transitioned from financial advising into vocational ministry, felt that call about 4 or 5 years ago. And God really laid it on my heart, like, hey, there seems to be a disconnect between the amount of wealth that exists and where that wealth goes, particularly among unreached peoples. And a few years into that, the Lord kind of gave me a heart for, hey, there's a discrepancy even in how we send from the West. A majority of the goers that we see coming from North America are primarily white, and there's just not a lot of diversity in sending. And one of those reasons is because of the financial models and discrepancy that currently exist. And so Betsy Stockton was actually the first African American woman sent from the United States. She went to what is now Hawaii. At the time, it was unreached, and saw the gospel go there. And so as we, Krystle, myself, and others were thinking about, hey, what's kind of the aroma or feel or vision that we have for this foundation, we thought of Betsy. And hey, we want to send thousands more like Betsy to the unreached. And our role, what we feel like the Lord has given us, is to be able to steward the resources that He's given to that end. So that's where the name comes from, and a little bit of the context into the birth of the foundation.
Krystle, could you tell us what your role is in the Betsy Stockton Foundation?
Yeah, I'm the advancement director, and what that means is I particularly invest in spaces that are multi-ethnic, that we can recruit people who have a desire to go but are looking for financial resources, and also have conversations with churches and pastors and leaders to be able to let them know that we are trying to resource ethnic minorities, multi-ethnic people, to see the fullness of the kingdom sent to the fullness of the world. And so as we are taking those steps forward, it becomes a place where people are excited to talk about it and excited to engage, and have seen the struggles of financing ethnic minorities and like the gap that needs to be filled there. So we're excited to fill that.
So I visited your website in preparation for this podcast, and you have a statistic on there that's from 2013. The Barna Group did a study, and it showed that within the United States, approximately 5% of missionaries sent via missions organizations are non-white. So I'm curious, that's a 10-year-old piece of data, but do you know if the needle has moved? Are we seeing more than 5% today? Any ideas on that?
Yeah, so actually, Barna hasn't technically released any more information than what they have on that in the last 10 years, and with hopes that they'll release something soon so that we can get a more accurate count. But I know personally, I have seen a rise in more ethnic minority exposure and education and awareness. And so we just really pray that God would continue to do a work through those things to see more culturally diverse people on the field. Because with the rise of it, I believe that the needle has moved, sure. But until we get the factual evidence, then we won't be able to say for sure. But I know that for me, within the last 10 years, I was one of those raised up to be a part of the sending culture of sending to the unreached. And so I can only imagine that God would do so much more with other ethnic minorities who he's placed it on their hearts as well.
Well, I don't know a lot about that Barna statistic. It seems, I mean, it depends on what they're considering as part of that 5%, if it includes Hispanics or not. But frankly, it seems high, even for today, based on what we've seen at Missio Nexus. But we'll actually be doing a research study on this topic over the course of the next year as we collect the member data. Let me ask you this question, Tyler or Krystle. What do you think is behind the lack of representation among ethnic or racial minorities in the U.S. mission force?
Yeah, I'll let Krystle expound on any thoughts that I miss here. But I think some things that we've seen or found is it's kind of multifaceted, and I've learned a lot. You know, not being an ethnic minority myself, this has been a huge learning curve, and for me personally, learning from Krystle and others, I think that finances obviously are a huge one, and why we've done this. You know, the kind of traditional model is you go and you support raise from friends and family. And when you're done support raise, then you go through your organization. And when your friends and family either don't have the resources necessary and or it's culturally inappropriate or even culturally unaware of what is support raising and why don't you have a job, and you know, and not that you don't experience that and that I didn't experience that in white culture as well because I support raised myself, but I think it's more prominent. And so I think finances are one. I also think the spaces in which we mobilize from. I think we, as kind of the majority culture church, have not done a good job of learning. I think we lead in a lot of spaces. We go to spaces where we look like one another, and I think engaging in spaces where ethnic minorities exist, going to conferences, churches, building friendships with pastors in the city, learning and kind of taking even like the model that Jesus gives, right? If you want to be great, then go and serve. And so I think taking this approach of servanthood and learning from others and not always being the leader or the teacher, I think would really serve to engage the body at large in sending. So those are a few thoughts. Krystle, I'll let you expound as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. I even think that it has to do like adding to the systems of which Tyler is talking about. There's even from our past, the results of what we're presently in right now. Looking back at things like us fighting for voting rights as African Americans, voting rights as people of color within America, and just the different culturally the cultural limitations that have been had in America. I think that has a big responsibility on why there aren't multi-ethnic people who have been going, or there's a lack of, and even thinking about just like the value of being seen as in the image of God. Like when we haven't put a large value on people, then we don't consider inviting them into spaces. And so sometimes it's the, okay, what's in my heart? Do I feel like this space should look like what the kingdom of God should look like? Or do I feel like I'm just comfortable here, so I'm not even thinking about it looking like what the kingdom of God looks like? And so changing and shifting of mindset when it comes to leadership, of what we're looking for, how we're sending, who we're sending, I think that's had an impact on the underrepresentation of ethnic minorities, as well as being the lack of care, having the lack of care, and the lack of awareness in the field. Because I've seen ethnic minorities go for long term, but because they didn't have the awareness on their team, with their team leads, of different things that they might be experiencing on the field, or even having the care for their experiences on the field, then they come back. And so those numbers shift even more. And so I think that there's an opportunity there for us to turn our hearts towards what are we doing to care for everyone in the ways that they might be impacted, even if I'm not impacted in the same way on the field. And so because of those things, it has caused sometimes there are negative connotations to, well, maybe I shouldn't go because I don't see myself on the field, or I've heard about these experiences and it's been hard for people who look like me, so I might not have a desire to go, and tackling those problems and asking God to help us to be more proactive and more loving when it comes to having multi-ethnic people be a part of the sending process or the going process.
I'd be curious to know, Krystle, based on your experience in African American churches, is there much tradition or history of talking about the global Great Commission? What's been the role that church leadership has played in the area of missions in African American churches?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ted. So just coming from my experience, I didn't learn much about the Great Commission until I was 26. And that's coming from a small African American church in small town Bryan, Texas. And I learned about it because I went to a predominantly white church in my town. That was a larger church, and I went to Perspectives. And that's where God wrecked my heart for the nations. And even learning from so many other African Americans that I've interacted with, missions is a thing, but it's really focused on missions nationally in our back door. What are we doing in our local communities as opposed to international missions? One, because of, like I said, the civil rights movement. When the civil rights movement happened, a lot of African American missionaries came back home to fight the fronts of what was happening in their backyards in America. And so it created this inward focus of the church to cause them to want to see the people that are our people, our cousins, our family friends, the people that we've known for years, who are in the streets, who have no relationship with Jesus, come to know Jesus, because we want to see our people saved. Sure, which is great. And so since that time, there's been more of a focus on local missions as opposed to international missions and the unreached. There are pockets of African American churches that are focused on it, but because of lack of resources, it's been difficult to take that next step, or even to figure out, how do we go about training, or how do we go about sending, and what does that look like? Maybe we can only just send money because we don't have the people, or maybe we have the people but we don't have the money. And so it's kind of been a difficult tension there, because when I think about sending, when I think about going long term to unreached, I think that it's a kingdom problem. I think that we, as the church in America as a whole, should be working together. So there's this disconnect of churches working together in order to see the mission completed, instead of churches on their own trying to figure out, okay, what do we do by ourselves? Because I feel like that's working against what the Lord has given us. He's given us a plethora of people in the body to see his mission move forward. And sometimes we get so inwardly focused that we forget to look up and say, okay, God, who are we supposed to be working with? How are you leading us so that we can see the fullness of your mission come to pass, as opposed to our own mission come to pass?
So I want to circle back to something, I don't know if it's Krystle or Tyler, maybe both of you, the idea of support raising, that it is a model that is in some sense foreign in a lot of, ethnic churches. I've heard a lot of African American churches say that, it's not something we practice. So a friend of mine, Virgil Dugan, he heads up a foundation, and he says fundraising is a beautiful spiritual ministry. And I just love that quote. And, we see that with Paul the Apostle when he's inviting the church in Philippi to give to Paul the missionary. He says, I'm not asking you to give to me for me. I'm asking you to give to this cause for you, that it might be credited to your heavenly inheritance. And so, a part of obviously spiritual health is that we invest in one another in these causes. I'm curious, is there any examples of churches, ethnic churches, where they are doing support raising for their missionaries, and are they seeing any success?
Krystle, you may have knowledge that I don't, but I have not seen anyone where there's a collective effort. I think even the grantees that we give to as a foundation, all of them are raising, personal support kind of in an individual model. Hey, I'm trying to reach family, friends, and maybe their churches helped with like a one-time gift, or, giving them a little bit monthly. But I haven't seen anything where it's like, hey, we as a church are going to collectively come around this man or woman, or both, and support them financially, support their entire mission financially. I think what we've seen has been either the support raise kind of traditional model, or even venturing into like BAM or marketplace ministry, where or maybe a combination of both, because you see that in Paul's ministry as well. Or some seasons he's receiving this from the church, and some he's receiving it from the work that he's doing with his hands. And so we've seen that as well, where they maybe raise half support, and then the other half you can gain from other avenues.
So I have some friends at a church called the Summit Church. You guys may have heard of them. They're part of the Church Planting Network. They have a desire to plant 1,000 churches by 2050. And I had the honor of having a conversation with one of their pastors about this specific thing, because I was curious about, like, what does it look like for them to send ethnic minorities? They have an entire training program that they put people through to go long term. And so even thinking about attracting ethnic minorities to go, one of their things is to fully support the ethnic minorities that they are giving the opportunities to. That's their hope. So when they go on short-term vision trips, they want to fund everything that they're doing if they're an ethnic minority. And then also when they are going through their program, their hope is to have enough money to be able to support them full time. I haven't had a follow-up conversation with him, so I'm not sure if they support them 100% fully, but that's their plan and that their desire to. And so I hope that if they're one of the churches that are doing it, I'm praying that there are other churches that are saying the same thing, that we want to see this needle move. So we're going to do whatever it takes in order to see our ethnic minorities or our multi-ethnic brothers and sisters get to the field and not have that barrier of financial resources that has been in the past.
Can you give us a little picture? Like, I don't know exactly what's your role in the process. Do you guys give monthly support? Do you give one-time gifts? How does your foundation operate?
Yeah, so we give currently one-time grants, and the way that it works is we partner with mission-sending organizations, i.e. Frontiers, Pioneers, MAPS Global, etc. and they have people kind of coming through their training program. And those who are ethnic minorities have the ability to come in and apply for a grant. And then our team interviews them as well. We only give grants out to ethnic minorities who are either mobilizing directly towards the unreached or going to the unreached themselves. And so that's kind of our niche area. And then they apply, our board praise processes, and then we give a grant, a financial grant. And so the hope is in the future that we become kind of like a centralized location, because a lot of churches or ministries don't have structures or funds or things set up. And so rather than kind of recreating that in every place, it was like, hey, what if we could be an area that takes those funds and then vets, sources people that are in need. So that's, yeah, high level how it works.
So this is a broad question. Obviously, we're hitting on the financial piece a lot, but what is it going to take to increase the representation of ethnic minorities on the field? Obviously, you guys are interacting with individuals and you're seeing some progress. And Krystle, I just want to say, I see what you see too. In the last number of years, I've become aware of the education and the catalyzing messages that are going out in ethnic churches. Again, looking forward to the data that Ted's going to provide soon so we can see what's really going on here. But I'm excited about what I see. But it's more than finances. How do we increase the representation?
Krystle, I'll let you take it.
Okay. So I think that one of the ways that we can increase representation is to recognize the barriers that are there. When we're talking about things like family structure or the church that they're going to, or we talked about like financial resources, the lack of financial resources, or their background, things that have really made it difficult because the sending culture has been so particular on who has been sent and how. I think that when we recognize those things and we are able to break down those things, then we can invite others into the space of wanting to go, feeling like that they are a part of the Great Commission, that they are needed in the Great Commission to see Matthew 24:14 come to pass. And so with hopes of seeing the beauty of what the American church has to offer, we can bring the fullness of it to the unreached so that they can see the fullness of God's kingdom and believe that Jesus is for them too. And so I know that that's a not the most particular set of like these are things that are going to solve the problem, but I think that like if we come together to understand what are the barriers, and they're not necessarily as centralized as we may think, because my barriers as an African American woman who was raised in a family that of believers who found out about the Great Commission at 26 can be different than someone who was not raised in a family of believers and found out about the Great Commission sooner, but their support system is different. So they might not get the things that they need in order to go, or feel supported in order to go. And so just recognizing those things and being willing to enter into those spaces and figure out how can we as a church break down those barriers to see more people have the opportunity to go.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thought is I think I hit on this a little bit earlier. Is just being a learner. Like I found out recently that there are 80 plus ethnic churches in Austin, and before that, I come into Austin and I'm like, oh yeah, there's 3 or 4 kind of churches, main good gospel preaching churches, and then you start looking around and you're like, man, wow, like the nations are here. Like this is a diverse place. And so what does it look like for me to go into, this Japanese church and learn and not be the leader and sit and, hey, what is y'all's mission? What is y'all's vision? How can we help support and really bring unity in the church at large? And I think submitting to people who don't look like me and don't act like me, don't come from the same background. And so I think that really it's a learner and asking, Lord, what are you doing outside of even kind of the traditional spaces? I was part of a college ministry, and my pipeline was you hear about the nations in college, you start support raising right after school. You go, and that's not bad. I think there's just avenues outside of that where we're just missing a lot of potential laborers for the harvest that are maybe being missed outside of kind of the traditional system per se.
Well, I think you're right about that. And I do think, a thing that we've learned at Missio Nexus is when we conduct whatever ministry it is, it's very easy to turn to your existing pool of relationships. And it's not going to change if that's kind of our default switch. We need to kind of be lifting our eyes up and seeing a little bit more broadly than that. So I assume you all have a website?
We do. Yes, it's the BetsyStocktonFoundation.com, and it's BETSEY. Sometimes that can trip people up.
So if you're out there, maybe you're a young potential candidate and you want to see if your agency can connect with these folks, that's how you could probably get a hold of them best. Love what you're doing. I love the vision. And I just pray that you guys will find tons of financial resources to really see many, many more go.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate you.
And I second that. And, I'd like to close with what have we learned here today, right? Something you said, Tyler, we need to be listeners and learners. And, if we want to go together, we need to build those relationships. And so, maybe just in closing, what are some ways that our listening and viewing audience can approach this? So let's say someone's listening and say, I want to be a part of mobilizing ethnic churches. What does that engagement look like? We said listening and learning, but maybe you can get real practical with us.
Yeah, so I would say by, like you said, engaging in relationships, like true relationships, not just saying like, oh, I just want to talk to them because I want to mobilize a church, but actually building relationships and getting to know people. Because I believe the more we know people, the more we love people, just like the more we know about the unreached, the more our hearts are turned towards them, the more willing we are able to build things with them and not try to give them what we've built and say, hey, you take it as yours, as opposed to saying, hey, how can we build this together so it works for all of us? And having those intentional conversations with people who are part of ethnic churches, gaining clarity on their church goals, gaining clarity on their vision and what accomplishing their goals looks like for them. Sharing stories and creating spaces to answer questions and or to do learning alongside them. I'd also say, I think we have to remember that we're not fixing something that's broken, but we are empowering others to help take up a mantle and a calling that Christ has invited all believers into. So really just inviting people into the space of saying, hey, like this is a call for us all. And we want to invite you to walk with us, or we want to walk with you and see what is God doing and how is he leading us towards the same vision to see the unreached come to know Jesus.
Love it. Thank you guys. Again, we're behind you. We're cheering you on.
Thanks so much.
Thank you guys
for being with us today.
Before you go, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership of 1615 and Missio Nexus. Check out 1615.org and missionexus.org for more resources on the mission of God and the matters of the mission. The Mission Matters podcast is hosted by Matthew Ellison, president of 1615, and Ted Essler, president of Missio Nexus.